The wind carried the faint smell of wet soil as Yalan Ward made his way up the gravel path. The afternoon sun, struggling through a layer of gray clouds that had hovered over the city since morning. He had walked this route so many times it felt like the soles of his sneakers knew every crack in the pavement and every bend in the hill where the cemetery gates opened into rows of quiet stones. He always came alone, always at the same hour, always with grocery store carnations, because they were cheap and his mother never wanted him. Wasting money on flowers when there were bills to worry about. Today, though, something in the air felt different, like the sky itself was holding its breath. When he reached Monica Ward's grave, he knelt down the way he always did, careful not to crush the wilted petals left from his last visit. And as he set the new bouquet beside the headstone, his eyes caught something unfamiliar at the base of the stone, a small, crisp, white envelope, propped neatly against the marble, as if someone had placed it there with intention rather than accident. His full name, Yalan, was written on the front in careful cursive. Cursive his mother never used. Cursive he didn't recognize at all. The sight of it jolted something sharp in his chest, because no one came here except him and his aunt. And Aunt Patricia's handwriting looked like someone fighting with the pen. This writing was elegant, steady, almost gentle. He looked over his shoulder automatically, scanning the quiet rows of graves. But the cemetery was empty, except for a man in the far distance cleaning a headstone with slow, deliberate movements. No footsteps approached, no voices murmured, no signs that anyone had slipped away moments before he arrived. The envelope rested there quietly, waiting for him, carrying a weight he could feel even before touching it. He hesitated, fear and curiosity tangling in his stomach, and when he finally reached out and picked it up, the paper felt warm, as if the hands that had left it had only recently let go. Something instinct or dread told him his life was about to change in ways he wasn't ready for, but change did not wait for permission, and when he slid his thumb beneath the flap, he felt the world around him shift in a way he couldn't yet name. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of folded paper, the edges slightly softened, like someone had held it many times before finding the courage to leave it. Yalan unfolded it carefully, his fingers trembling just enough that the paper rattled faintly in the quiet air, and his eyes landed on the first line, written in that same steady handwriting. I owe your mother my life, and I owe you the truth. His breath caught not because he understood what it meant, but because he suddenly realized this was not a random note, nor a sympathy letter from someone who missed the funeral. This was a confession. As he read on, the words tugged at the deepest, darkest corners of the night that had shaped the last 2 years of his life. The writer introduced herself as Margaret Lewis, a name he had never heard, but one that carried decades of heaviness in the way she wrote it. You do not know me, the letter continued, but I knew your mother. I knew her bravery, though I only witnessed it for seconds before everything changed. The next lines made the hairs at the back of his neck rise as he read about a rainy night, a slick road, a broken traffic light, and 2 cars whose paths had collided with catastrophic timing. I was the reason she swerved, Margaret wrote. I was the one drifting into the wrong lane. I was the one who should not have been driving at all. Yalan felt his stomach twist violently, a sickening mix of anger and disbelief rising like a wave inside him. He had spent 2 years imagining his mother's death as an unfortunate accident, weather, fate, maybe exhaustion, but never once had anyone said another driver was involved, and certainly not that the crash had been caused by a real, living person out there walking around with breath in their lungs while his mother lay cold beneath the earth. But the letter did not stop there. Margaret's handwriting seemed to waver as she admitted. She had not been alone in her car that night. Her daughter had been strapped in the back seat, crying moments before the collision, a child too small to understand the danger her mother had put them in. Your mother saved us, the letter read. She chose to crash her own car instead of letting ours be struck head-on. She chose my child's life over her own. Yalan stared at the sentence until the letters blurred, his heart beating so hard it felt like it might bruise his ribs from the inside. The weight of those words pressed heavily into Jalen's chest as memories of the night Monica died flooded him, not the details, because he hadn't been there, but the atmosphere, the emotions, the fragments of grief that glued themselves to his bones. He remembered the knock on the door just after midnight, the flashing lights outside painting patterns across the living room walls, the way his aunt's voice cracked when she told him, "Baby, your mama, she ain't coming home," and how the world had tilted so violently he thought he might faint. He remembered the police report that claimed it was a single-car accident, the doctors who said she lost control on a curve, the social worker who spoke to him with soft, pitying eyes, as if the truth needed to be softened for a child who had just lost everything. No one had ever mentioned another vehicle. No one had ever said the word sacrifice, and no one had ever, in all the endless paperwork and conversations and hushed phone calls, said that his mother's last living act was choosing someone else's child over her own. As he reread the paragraph, anger began to flicker beneath his skin, a heat that spread through his arms and into his hands, clenching into fists. If this woman, this Margaret, was telling the truth, then someone had lied to him, shielded him, hidden the story not to protect him, but perhaps to protect Margaret herself. The letter continued with confessions that lanced deeper than he wanted to allow. Margaret admitted she'd tried to reach out in the early months after the crash, but Aunt Patrice had refused every attempt, threatening to call the police if she ever contacted Yolan again. She wrote about sitting outside the cemetery for months, watching from her car as Yolan visited the grave, too scared to approach, too guilty to stay away. "I have carried your mother's ghost with me every day," she wrote, "but I know her ghost belongs to you, not to me. I want only to give you what was stolen, clarity, truth, and the chance to ask questions I have spent years preparing to answer." Yolan looked up from the letter, the sky darkening slightly as clouds gathered overhead, carrying the first hints of a storm. He wasn't sure if the tremor running through him came from the cool wind or the realization that everything he believed about his mother's death had been a reflection of half-truths and silence. The bottom of the letter held something he hadn't expected, an invitation. "If you wish to speak to me, or if you simply want to yell at me, I will be sitting on the bench outside the cemetery gate every Sunday at 3. If you never come, I will understand, but I will keep coming anyway." He glanced at his phone automatically. 2:42 p.m. His heart jolted as if someone had just yanked it forward. She could be there now, right now, waiting, hoping, fearing he would not appear. Logic told him to walk away, to leave the cemetery, to go home, to protect whatever was left of his heart from further injury. Anger told him to tear the letter into shreds and scatter them across the wet grass in front of his mother's grave. But something deeper, something quieter, the part of him that had spent 2 years feeling abandoned not only by loss but by unanswered questions, that part told him he needed to see her, needed to hear her voice, needed to look into the eyes of the woman who had lived because his mother had died. Without giving himself more time to think, he slipped the letter back into the envelope, placed the carnations carefully beside the headstone, whispered, "I'll be back, Ma," and walked toward the gate with a mixture of dread and resolve that felt like it belonged in someone older than 14. His steps were fast but not frantic, driven by a mix of fear, hope, and a strange sense of inevitability, like he was not just following a path through the cemetery, but stepping into a chapter of his mother's story he had never been allowed to read. As he neared the iron gate, he could see a figure seated on the bench beyond it, hunched slightly, hands clasped in their lap, head bowed not in prayer, but in anticipation. The wind tugged at her coat, pushing stray strands of gray-streaked hair across her forehead. Even from a distance, he could tell she was bracing herself for the moment their eyes would meet. When he stepped through the gate, the woman looked up, her blue eyes widening with surprise and something that looked very close to relief. "Yolan?" she asked, her voice trembling like someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but still wasn't ready for it. He nodded, hands buried in his hoodie pockets to hide the shaking. She stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might break whatever fragile truce existed between them. For a brief moment, neither spoke. They simply stared at each other, one with grief sharpened into anger, the other with guilt weathered into humility. Finally Yalin broke the silence. "I read your letter," he said, his voice low but steady. Margaret nodded, her throat tightening. "I've tried to write it for 2 years," she whispered. "I tore up dozens before that one. I kept trying to find words that could contain the truth without overwhelming you. I know I can't undo what happened. I know I can't expect forgiveness." Yalin felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. "You took my mom," he said plainly, the words hitting the air like a blunt instrument. She flinched but didn't look away. "Yes," she said softly. "I did, and I would give anything in this world to change that." Her voice cracked as she added, "I have lived every day knowing your mother died because of my mistake, and knowing she died saving my child." She reached into the grocery bag beside her and pulled out a bouquet of lilies wrapped in brown paper. "These were for her," she said quietly, "but I never went to her grave. I didn't think I had the right." The sincerity in her voice, the tremor in her hands, the weight of grief etched into the lines on her face, it all hit Yalin harder than he expected. For the first time, he saw not just the woman responsible for Monica's death, but a mother who had almost lost her own daughter, a woman who had carried a ghost of guilt for years. Something inside him softened ever so slightly, but the hurt was still too fresh, too deep. "I don't know why you're telling me this now," he said. Margaret looked down. "Because I couldn't let you grow up believing your mother died for nothing. She died being extraordinary. You deserve to know that." They sat on the bench, not close, but not far. The space between them filled with decades of unspoken apologies and unanswered questions. The sky darkened as the rain clouds thickened, yet neither moved, both anchored by the gravity of the conversation unfolding between them. Yalin asked questions, in a quiet voice that carried the weight of years' questions he had once whispered to the ceiling, to his pillow, to the silence that ate him alive after sunset. "Did she suffer?" he asked. Margaret swallowed hard. "The doctors said it was fast," she answered. "They said she didn't linger in pain. They said she kept her hands on the wheel until the last moment, like she was still trying to steer away, still trying to control what she could." The image shattered him and mended something at the same time. "She always did that," he murmured. "Tried to fix everything, even the things hurting her." Margaret nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "She fixed my life," she whispered. "Her courage gave my daughter a future. I watched Hannah graduate middle school last year and thought, your mother should have been there to see her own child do the same." Hearing that shook him deeply, not because Margaret was wrong, but because he had never imagined the parallel futures his mother's sacrifice had created. He told Margaret about Monica, the way she cooked, the way she laughed, the way she danced with him on Saturday mornings, even when the apartment was cold, because the heat bill was overdue. And as he spoke, he noticed Margaret, listening with the reverence of someone who felt she did not deserve to hear these things, but was grateful to be allowed anyway. The rain began to fall softly, a light tapping on the metal bench, and neither of them moved from their place. For the first time since Monica died, Yalin felt like someone else was carrying a piece of his grief, not to take it away, but to acknowledge it existed. Eventually, when the rain grew heavier, Margaret reached into the grocery bag again and handed him a second envelope. This one was larger, sealed more carefully, heavier in weight. "This isn't about buying forgiveness," she said quickly, seeing the immediate suspicion on his face. "I know forgiveness may never come. This is something I should have done a long time ago." Inside the envelope, she explained, was documentation for a scholarship fund she had established in Monica's name, a fund meant to pay for Jalen's future education, or to be directed toward another child if he chose. "Your mother saved my daughter," she said. "The least I can do is try to give her son the opportunities she wanted for you." Yalan didn't reach for it right away. He stared at it, conflicted, his heart pulled between resentment and reluctant gratitude. Accepting it didn't erase the hurt, but refusing it didn't bring his mother back. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this," he admitted, voice cracking. Margaret nodded. "Whatever you want," she replied softly. "Use it. Don't use it. Burn it. Throw it in the river. I won't question your choice. You have lived through something no child should. I just want you to know, I'm trying to honor her." After a long moment, Yalan took the envelope not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. They stood to leave, walking slowly toward the gate together. Not side by side, but no longer strangers, drifting in opposite currents of grief. At the entrance, she paused and said, "I'll be here next Sunday. Not to pressure you, just in case you ever want to talk again." He didn't promise he would come. He didn't promise he wouldn't. But he didn't walk away without meeting her eyes. "I'm still angry," he said quietly, "and I don't know if that will change." "I know," she whispered, "and I'll never blame you for it." When Yalan returned to his mother's grave, the rain had softened into a mist that made the headstones shimmer in the fading light. He knelt again, placing the second envelope beside the first, letting them rest there like new chapters, introduced into a story he thought had ended the night she died. "You really did that, Ma," he murmured, tracing the carved letters of her name. "You really chose someone else's child, even though your own was waiting for you to come home." His voice shook, not with anger this time, but with something closer to acceptance that his mother's death had not been meaningless or random, but the result of her courage he had inherited without realizing it. He told her about the meeting, the bench, the bouquet, the trembling in Margaret's voice, the questions he finally asked, and the answers he finally received. He told her he wasn't sure if he would see Margaret again, but he didn't rule it out. And as the mist grew lighter, and the sky shifted into the soft blue-gray of early evening, he stood, pressing 2 fingers gently to the top of the headstone. "I'll make you proud," he whispered, "even if it hurts." He walked away from the grave, not lighter, not healed, but no longer carrying the same weight, alone. Some parts of grief remained unchanged, but others had shifted, adjusted, taken new shape inside him. His mother had died saving a child. Now he had the truth. It didn't fix everything, but it gave him a direction. As he made his way down the path, the envelopes tucked safely into his pocket, he felt something unfamiliar but steady, like the beginning of forgiveness. Not for Margaret, not yet, but for himself, for surviving, for continuing, for choosing to understand rather than be consumed by anger. And this time, as he left the cemetery, he didn't feel like he was walking away from his mother. He felt like he was walking with the part of her bravery that lived on in him.